Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'd love to tell you a story. The story is about Svetlana. She was born in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. And growing up, she loved computers. When she got accepted to her local university that offered a computer science degree, she was super excited to start majoring in computer science. She did that for 4 years, and when she graduated, she tried to find a job as a computer programmer. Unfortunately, it was hard for her to get a computer engineering job for one reason or another, so she settled for a QA position. QA, if you guys don't know, is quality assurance that usually involves a lot of manual testing and wasn't really leveraging her computer science degree and her love for computer programming. But she was persistent. About a year from there, she applied for a computer engineering job, and she got it, and she started programming for a local outsourcing firm. She spent the next 8 years practicing her craft, becoming a really senior and highly experienced software engineer. She could pick up very difficult concepts. She could learn new skills. She was just amazing all around. Sometime in 2016, she got married to a US citizen and moved to South Dakota. In South Dakota, she was pretty confident coming to the US that she's a highly skilled engineer. She's got everything it takes, and US is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. She was confident that she's going to have no trouble finding employment and finding a job in her area of expertise. But she was in for a big surprise. When she put together her resume and started sending it out, it was as if she was sending that resume into a black hole. Looking at her resume, you would basically see that she went to some unknown university in Eastern Europe. She worked at a company that no one has ever heard of. And all of the assumptions obviously kick in, and she wasn't even getting a first interview. Not even talking about going through the interviews and all the other biases that kick in there, but not even getting a first interview. So she assumed that maybe her skills are outdated. She needs something that's more hot in the space right now. So she hopped on a lot of the online educational resources like Coursera, like Udacity, Khan Academy, or some of the lectures that are published by leading institutions, and started acquiring some new skills, like machine learning, like data analysis. And she got pretty good at those too. Within a year of practice, she was pretty good at all of those newer technologies. And she was like, all right, now I'm ready. I'm going to put this on my resume, go back into the market, and this time, whenever somebody sees machine learning on my resume, they're just going to call me back. But no luck this time either. She went out, sent even more resumes, and again, nothing. The black hole, same black hole as ever. Now, take a pause and think about this. What's happening is that you've got a highly skilled software engineer in one of the most competitive markets out there, where everybody is seeking talent. Everybody is saying how much there is shortage, how we can't find enough people, how there is thousands and thousands of open jobs in this space. Yet she can't even get through a first interview. And what's happening is that the resume-based approach to recruiting that we've been doing for the past 20 years used to work, but it's kind of changing. What's changing is that the proxy that says if we look at where you worked and where you went to school, 30 years ago, it wasn't bad. 30 years ago, in early 90s, right, if you wanted to find a good proxy for is this person going to be skilled, let's say, in computer engineering, I mean, there weren't any other ways to learn rather than to go to one of the few universities that offered a degree in that program so your professors could teach you, or you could go to a company where you could learn from some mentors. In the past 30 years, with the evolution of the internet, what started happening is there is a wealth of online educational materials. From YouTube to Khan Academy to universities like MIT and Harvard literally publish all of their lectures, all of their materials. So if you're motivated enough, you can literally go out there, learn all of those skills, and then your resume would say that you went nowhere. You didn't go to a company that we recognize, you didn't study at a school that we recognize. And you can't really blame recruiters. What happens is that as soon as you put a job post out there, you're flooded with thousands of resumes, and they're all kind of looking the same. I'm sure we all have handed out some of those resume-based rejections where we didn't recognize anything on the resume, and I'm sure we've gotten some too, where we were like, how on earth did I get rejected? I was totally qualified for this job. But this change that's going on in the education space, this change that's going on in how we acquire new skills is only accelerating. In the past 30 years, that evolution has gotten faster and faster and faster, to the point where there is so many secondary degree programs that are sprouting out every day that are not university, like the boot camps, like the training programs. And yet the recruiting space is still in that resume era. And the change and the difference, the gap between the two is only getting bigger. Now, in Svetlana's case, it has a happy ending. Because what happened is that after struggling for a couple of years to find an opportunity, she basically settled for a translator job, just kind of to pay the bills and get by. But she was still kind of opportunistically sending out resumes just in case, someone decided to go beyond resumes and do something about it. But she wasn't really hoping for much. But someone did go beyond resumes. An algorithmic trading firm in Chicago actually made the pledge to go beyond resumes and give anybody that applied an assessment, an automated assessment that would help them identify who's qualified, who's not. And if you think about the evolution of the resume, right, it started with something like the PDF resume, right, where we all know it, we're all closely familiar. You update it every time you're looking for a job. It's usually as soon as you update it, 2 months later, it's outdated already. Some of it is a little bit exaggerated because, no one other than the recruiters see it, so you might as well exaggerate it a little bit to get by. And then the resume 2.0 is something more like your LinkedIn profile, right? The LinkedIn profile is a little bit more up to date. You update it whether you're looking for a job or not because it's kind of your online business presence. And it's a little bit more valid because there's a lot of people looking at it, so you can't be too exaggerating on it. It has to be more realistic. Yet it's still, what it's using is proxies. What I mean by a proxy is when you say I worked at this company or I went to this institution, those are used as proxies to figure out if you're going to be a performing employee, if you have the skills, the abilities, the personality to succeed at the job. They're not direct measurements. If you think about a direct measurement, right, think of a flight simulator for a pilot. When you're hiring a pilot and trusting them a plane, you're not asking them to show the resume and prove that they have flown planes before. I mean, you might, right? But you go beyond that and put them into a realistic simulator that tells you, can they do the job or not? And that's a direct measurement of ability. So when I think about Resume 3.0, Resume 3.0 has to be a direct measurement of ability. It has to be without proxies, because proxies, even if they work for a short period of time, eventually the proxies get outdated. Just like education, just like past experience are outdated now. And what's happening in Svetlana's case, once they gave her the assessment and they got back the results, they were shocked at the numbers. Her scores were so high that they were like, this is unbelievable, but let's bring her in. 3 weeks later, she was sitting in downtown Chicago interviewing with 3 software engineers from the company, and they were all shocked at how good she was and how they would have never even considered interviewing her if they saw her resume without the CodeSigna coding report. And that coding report that showed the scores and showed her abilities, and that assessment that simulated her in a very realistic way and measured her ability, gave that signal without the proxies, and it helped bridge the gap. But this change that we've started is not going to be easy, because resume-based recruiting has been a part of this industry for a long time, for many decades. And it's not just enough to build a great technology and say, hey, everybody go use it, and say it's going to solve all the problems. It takes many, many years to make that transition and to make the switch. And CodeSigna itself only offers that for technical hiring. It only offers a solution to go beyond resumes and technical hiring. But this problem exists in so many other fields. Basically, every field we recruit for, the proxies we use now are not reliable, and they're becoming less and less reliable every year. So to encourage that change, right, to encourage more companies, more entrepreneurs to start tackling this problem, to start solving this problem in every field, I actually launched a nonprofit called GoBeyondResumes.org that brings together industry leaders to start conversations, to really ignite a movement that can transition, that can transform the industry. Because after all, talent is the most precious resource we have as humans, and the only real way to start growing it and discovering it more is to start going beyond resumes. Thank you. I've been reminded 4 times to open it up for questions. So if anybody has any questions, I believe we've got people with mics who can pass it around. Who I don't see. There he is.
For non-tech positions, is there a way to automate that assessment? Could it be a questionnaire? Like what other examples have you seen for that?
Absolutely. I think you want to start from, even if you're not automating it, you still can design the process in a way that's more objective. Automation is difficult, right? So like, for example, we hire sales development representatives whose job is to call awesome people like you and say, hey, would you be interested in a product like this, right? So what's the job? Call to people you don't know, talk to them, be respectful, be able to present your case, and then hang out, right? So our first step is not a resume review. The first step of the process, if you're applying for that job, is you get a voicemail challenge. So you're supposed to call, leave a voicemail, pitching yourself. You can obviously not pitch our product, you don't know it yet, but you know yourself. So if you can present yourself on a voicemail, because again, most of the time you get a voicemail and you leave a voicemail, I'm sure you guys get many, hopefully not all from us, but you get many. And if you can do that, and then somebody on our side, without looking at the resume, which is also important, because if I look at the resume, then I go review the voicemail challenge, I'm already biased. Like the things that I saw on that resume are just gonna make my judgment more harsh, whether I want it or not. It just instantly, things turn into your brain, where you start judging some exact results differently if you've gotten already those biases. Now, can this be automated? I think it can. I think with AR and VR getting more advanced, in which we can create better simulations, and, for example, voice processing getting more and more advanced, if you could automatically judge the tone of voice, the comfort, the presentation ability, you should be able to generate an automated score, again, to avoid a human introducing their biases as soon as they review that assessment result.
And just one follow-up question. What has that done to the interview conversation? Does that become more intentional and human because you now have this set of skills that have been validated? Or I guess, what have you seen from that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So like, what has that done to the interview process? I think what that does to the interview process, first and foremost, you start it off on the right foot. Instead of what happens in many cases, you walk into the interview looking at the resume, and this has been shown over and over again in researches that people without very deliberate training in how to conduct interviews walk into the interview room to validate their assumptions that they've made looking at the resume. So you're not really there to interview, you're just there to validate the assumptions you've made. So if you start off with objective measurements, more objective results, if you start off by like knowing a little bit more objective data about this person, you are inclined in the right direction. You're coming in being like, okay, well, I saw the resume challenges. Looks like you were maybe a little bit nervous. Is that something that you can be coached on or not? Or maybe there is a certain piece in your, like the presentational ability that's missing. Can that be coached or not? And just focusing on that, and also on the person itself as a whole, and not necessarily like, so tell me about, where you went to school and what classes you took. You guys keep track of who raised the hand first, so it's hard for me.
Hi, very thought-provoking assertion. So if we're not looking at resumes, and the second thing you mentioned is potential projects like the voicemail, would a third one to be analyzing individuals' social media content and profile and who they're connected to? And what are the dangers in doing that?
Yeah, great question. So in case anybody couldn't hear it, is one of the options to go beyond resumes analyzing social media content that somebody puts out there. I think there is value in analyzing that, but it's also very, very risky. I've heard that argument before that like, oh, we can find out everything about a person by analyzing social media. I mean, let's be honest, you guys all know your social media persona is usually very different from the real persona. And if you try to analyze data that's put out there with the twist of like how I want others to see me and who I really am, you might end up in a dangerous territory where you are punishing someone, you are cutting someone's opportunities just because they chose to represent themselves in way X on social media. So I don't necessarily find that objective. It's a data point, but I don't find that an objective representation of a person because, I mean, I know 100% true, none of my friends' social media profiles are who they are.
So I applied to a job where they used some process ahead of time, like there were a series of tasks. I mean, if you did the first one and passed whatever, then you got the next one and that kind of thing. And I'm curious about your thoughts about how the processes that you choose and how you administer them also communicate things about your culture, like that it is a two-way street. I will say in that process, I
Right.
grew to think that I did not want to work for these people. So I'm interested in that part of the process too.
And absolutely, like the way your interview, starting from your assessments to every interaction, I mean, it's always a two-way street. I mean, people who don't realize that interviews are a two-way street are missing the point because you're being interviewed just as much as the candidate. And a lot of people only think about closing that candidate when they are extending an offer. Closing starts like day one. First email, first interaction, you are in a relationship and you have to think about what does that person think of you and your company from your assessment process. When it comes to assessments themselves, right, the challenges, I think what happens today is a lot of companies are tasked to create their own assessment processes, yet most of the time they're all assessing kind of the same thing, right? So if, for example, if you've got a software engineer, I mean, how many different variations of software engineers are there? Right, if you take like new grad programs, new grad software engineering hiring programs, they're all assessing for the same thing. I mean, it's basically what you expect someone to graduate with from a CS program, like the fundamentals of computer science, computer engineering, yet every company tries to create their own assessment for it, and a lot of them get it wrong. And like one way they get it wrong is if you take one of your engineers and say, oh, build a coding challenge that I'm gonna give to all of our students that apply to this job, what happens is that person is going to introduce their own biases in that coding challenge. For example, if you've got a lot of guys working for you, software engineers, happens all the time, they're probably into things like poker, things like competitive games, and they end up creating coding challenges that are about that. And by doing so, you instantly biased your assessment towards people who are just like that. And you biased against, for example, women who might not be necessarily into poker or whatever game that you or that specific demographic enjoys playing. It happens all the time, and like it's not conscious. It's like it's that subconscious, like, well, I'm into this. Why isn't everybody else? So I think it's very important to think about assessments and introducing this layer as more of a standard, as something that like a third party should bring. If you think of like globally scaled assessments, I mean like SATs, they're not perfect, right? But they're a decent objective. Every university doesn't design their own SAT. If they did, it would be way worse. There's one organization that actually designs an assessment that everybody else trusts, and they put a lot of research and thought behind it. All right, I'm out of time. Before I get kicked out of the stage, if you guys have any other questions, please come find me. Thank you.